Ben. Last year here at the Coalition, we had a presentation on GOBOC, the General Obligation Bond Oversight Committee, by Larry Bush and Brian Larkin. Hopefully they were going to be here tonight. They said that one of the main challenges of GOBOC was a lack of specificity in the bond language within the voter handbook. Would you comment on this?
Sure. So I'll say I've worked on the city's capital plan wearing a number of different hats over the years. So whether as the mayor's budget director, as an analyst, I helped support kind of capital review. And then in the city administrator's office when I was working for Ed Lee at the time, and probably the most fun assignment I've had during my 20 years plus in government was working on kind of reinvigorating the city's capital planning program. And now I'm in a different seat, kind of reviewing and auditing results of bonds as they move ahead, and helping the city administrator issue the bonds needed that the voters have approved to fund projects that she is implementing. The city's gone through kind of a renaissance in terms of general obligation bond financing for projects during the last 10 years or so. You know, we went through a very bad period as a city where we had very large failures of programs like Laguna Honda, the Parks bond. There were challenges in the late 90s related to the community college district bond. And for a while, the voters were understandably pessimistic about approving additional GEO bonds. The city went through a number of reforms, and then in the last bit of time, including creating a 10-year capital plan that governs them going ahead. Since that time, voters have approved each of the GEO bonds that's come forward, and we actually have, I think, more GEO bonds kind of implemented or underway in the last 10 years than we did in the previous 50 in the city. Just to give a sense of the magnitude of construction occurring all over the place. I think you see some of this in the parks and other things in the city. There's definitely a tension in general obligation bonds which have to be approved by the voters in how restrictive is the language to ensure promises about that are legally binding about a specific project versus allowing reasonable flexibility to respond to changing conditions when the world does change. And we definitely have had bonds in the past where the bond language was very specific and said that it shall be spent on project A, B, C, and D with specific dollar values on it. And unfortunately, occasionally you find the world changes and you can't implement the last project because of cost overruns or inflation, but you have no flexibility in the voter-adopted language to do anything but let that money sit. So there's a tension between specificity in the bonds and flexibility. The more flexible you are, though, the harder it becomes to judge exactly what was delivered versus what was promised to voters. So I think you do feel that tension. I think the bond reports that I see today that accompany, they're not what the voters adopt, but there's a report that accompanies the bond while it's working its way through the legislative process is the best source to go to. And those are much more professionally prepared than they were 15 years ago, in my view. There's much greater specificity there to judge how you're doing. We actually now also prepare My Shop at the direction of GOBOC, which is a citizen oversight body reviewing bond spending. We prepare an annual audit and review of all GEO bonds that are pending in the city, and we report on scope, schedule, and budget and how they're doing. And that's a publicly facing report that we do annually. So it's a...
Okay, one more question. And we send everybody the link, whoever doesn't have a hard copy of the 2019 Controller's City Survey. I have some extras. Thank you to your office for providing these. The results of the 2019 Controller City Survey are now online. Would you like to comment on the results and the methodology?
Sure.
And does everybody need a copy of this? Okay.
So really quickly, part of our job is to provide information to the public on how the city is performing, and we do that in a number of different ways. One of them is every 2 years we conduct a survey of residents in San Francisco and ask for how the city is doing generally and then in different service areas, parks, transit, safety. And we've been doing this now for over 20 years, so we have a long history of results that we can report and track how perception of city government is changing and city services are changing over time. So that's what the city survey is. We just published it about a week and a half ago. The written report is here. There's a much more fun tool available online where you can drill into a neighborhood and check out results. But mixed results, and I don't think shocking for those of us that live in the city. Some city services perform better than they did 2 years ago, and in most cases reflecting a long-term trend of improvement. So the libraries have seen a long-term improvement in perception in the city for many years. And for the first time, we had an A-, which was the library this year, with residents rating it very well across a host of different attributes. The other department where you see steady improvement versus 2 years ago and over the last 10 years ago are parks in the city. In particular, facility conditions, which I think isn't what you'd hope to see having invested significant funds in renovating a lot of our parks in the city. So parks and libraries improving. Safety kind of in the middle, perceptions of safety across the city kind of relatively constant versus 2 years ago. The most disturbing thing for me about safety results that we see is how different the safety results feel depending on where in the city you are, what color your skin is, and how much money you make. And the southeast part of the city, perceptions of safety are dramatically worse than they are in the rest of the city. That continues both at day and night, although the disparity is a little bit less than it was 2 years ago, so that's a positive sign. And then the worst results in the survey this year were really transit. Muni results were significantly worse than they were a couple of years ago. 2 years ago, 60% of San Franciscans rated Muni an A or a B. 2 years later, 40% do, which is a really significant change in a relatively short period of time. So Muni results are the worst in the survey. We also asked people what are the most important issues facing the city, and are those issues better or worse than they were 2 years ago? The top issues wouldn't surprise anyone here: homelessness, street cleanliness, and affordability continue to be the top three issues for city residents, regardless of neighborhood. It is remarkable how consistent those results look across the entire government, or across the entire city. And unfortunately, and in particular for homelessness, a majority of residents think that homelessness is worse than it was 2 years ago. Again, which doesn't surprise those of us that live here, I don't think. 67% of residents reporting that homelessness is worse than during the last 2 years. That's a little bit about the results, if that helps.
Thank you.
George, we're all done with the pre-submitted questions.
Okay.
So we're opening it to the
I
floor.
want to ask questions, but I know it's not about me. So, we'll start with you, Glenn.
So I was curious, all four of you, what your position would be on the public bank.
Well, our office was set up to actually do a study on a municipal bank. That measure was passed a year ago at the Board of Supervisors, and we got a little funding and resources, and we created a task force to examine it. About a month or two ago, came out with a report of the task force that I think was very, very informative. I know I can safely say it's the most informed study and analysis of the possibility of how you would create a municipal bank or a public bank, given what outcomes you want to deliver. There have been other reports, but a lot of them I think were more theoretical, and I think maybe due to some of the outlooks of their authors, very optimistic and saying, it could do this, it could do that, it could do. But there weren't a lot of specifics. The task force worked very hard to put specifics there. What it showed was that depending upon what you want to deliver, it could take a medium amount of money, not a tiny amount of money, but a medium amount of money and time to create a public bank or programs that would improve financial service offerings in the city, or if you want to kind of go all the way and stand up a whole actual bank comparable to the biggest banks that we do business with right now, that would take billions of dollars, possibly tens of billions of dollars, and decades to get that up and running to a point where it was self-sustaining. I mean, this wasn't ever gonna be a thing to make profit off of, but at least should take taxpayer funds into it every year. So when would it finally become self-sustaining? So I'm the treasurer tax collector. I'm actually, we call my position the banker for the city. We actually manage all the relationships with the banks, and we keep the city's money safe. We work very closely with banks, and all of us and every part of the city relies on our banking relationships to be successful, as does any other organization, a private company, a nonprofit company, an association, anybody does that. So I have a very good understanding of the services we deliver from banks, and I appreciate them, and they allow our city to be successful. I firmly believe that. At the same time, I have been one of the loudest critics of banks, and I have been very vocal about the things I see banks do wrong. And there are many things that banks do wrong, and there are at times even ways that banks are predatory. I'm not satisfied with that. I demand that banks not do that. They don't always listen to me, but I put those demands out there all the time. And one of the things that I believe I was one of the first, when I did this, we were one of the first cities in the country to do this. When we put out a solicitation for banks to provide banking services to our city, this was over 5 years ago, we actually put socially responsible banking criteria into our request for proposals. And we said, we set certain parameters. We said, you need to report to us how you're doing. This was in the depths of the recession. A lot of banks were creating foreclosure situations. I said, we want you to report to us what your foreclosures are during this difficult time. And we received that with the proposals. I said, we will not tolerate you offering predatory products to citizens of our city. And there was at least one bank that was offering essentially a payday loan through their ATMs to citizens of our city. And we said to them very clearly, if you want our business, you're going to have to stop offering that product in our city. I can't control you outside of our city, but in our city, you're not going to offer it here. And that bank ended up withdrawing its proposal for our city's banking business. I feel that was the right thing to do. So I don't take a position on should we or should we not create a public bank. That's for our learned mayor and board of supervisors and the policymakers we all elect to make those important decisions, because they make the decisions about what the city spends money on, and I don't. I'm an implementer, like a lot of the other people you see sitting up here. So I work very hard to make sure that I'm a nonpartisan implementer of the voters' will and the lawmakers' will. But I think we wanted to make sure we give a lot more information to that discussion.
So it would seem to me if, all right, I'm sorry.
We could talk afterwards if you like.
Thank you for that.
That would be great.